everybody. It's Jay Dickey, President of American Heritage Partners. We've been writing and videoing for the last year or so about a number of different topics related to the Revolutionary War. We're in the era of 250th anniversaries, Lexington and Concord, Bunker Hill, all of that. Today, I want to talk about something that deserves a lot more recognition that it is receiving. It's the 250th anniversary of the Siege of Quebec. At the beginning of the Revolution, both the Continental Congress and our Commander-in-Chief, General Washington, concluded that it would be a good idea to invade Canada. And they had two targets. One was Montreal, one was Quebec. And so the story I'm going to tell you, I'm going to bring up my slide deck here, is the story of that Siege of Quebec, which was led by none other than Benedict Arnold. Title of my talk, Before He Was a Traitor, Benedict Arnold and the Siege of Quebec. I'm going to talk about three different parts of this. First, a little bit of background about Benedict Arnold before 1775, when he was not yet a military figure. I'm going to talk about this incredible expedition that he led. We call it today the Arnold Expedition, and it's gone down in history as one of the most valiant, most courageous, most insane expedition that took place during the Revolution, and I'll be talking to you about that. And I'm going to end with a little bit about the battle that ended it all, which took place on New Year's Eve in 1775 in a blinding snowstorm. So bear with me while I talk a little bit about Benedict Arnold. And we'll start with the rhetorical question. Was he a hero or a villain? People differ about that. Most of us remember him as the villain who committed treason, betrayed his country, and ended up turning sides and joining the British armies and leading them against us after his treachery was discovered in 1780 and he fled. And that was an incredible turning point in the life story of Benedict Arnold, because before that, I would argue, and many historians would agree with me, he was in fact a warrior on behalf of the Continental Army, and he was a hero to many, who both his soldiers and colonists whose lives were affected by him. So he was mid-30s when the war started, born in 1741, as you see here. His family was doing quite well. They were down in Connecticut, in Norwich, and later he moves to New Haven, but his father fell on hard times. He became a drunk. His business was failing, and pretty much ended Benedict Arnold's run as a scion of a wealthy family. Went on, therefore, in 1749 and became an apprentice in a trading company. Gained a lot of experience there, both as a businessman and in sailing. He became a ship's captain of sorts as part of that job, and that ended up standing him in very good stead later on during the Revolutionary War, particularly in his naval battles that he led against the British Navy, which is not the subject of today's talk. So he took over a trading business. He was down in New Haven, as I say, minding his own business when war broke out. He had developed a reputation, I should say, as a very shrewd businessman, but also kind of a failed human being in many respects. You'll see here there were rumors of him whoring and drinking and dueling while on his trading voyages. I don't have any facts to share with you about that, but those were the rumors. He also, like a number of tradesmen when the British were taking charge of New England and oppressing the people and stopping trade, a number of trade people turned to smuggling, and that was true of Benedict Arnold. It was true of John Hancock and a number of others. Uh, as the run up to the war involved more and more of the towns and villages in New England, it found its way to New Haven. They were being seeing the handwriting on the wall that perhaps war was coming. And so in February 1775, mind you, this was before Lexington and Concord, he formed a committee in New Haven to procure weapons so they could protect themselves. And then became the captain of a local militia that was formed. All of this in the couple of months right before Lexington and Concord. So that happens on April the 19th, 1775. Immediately, Benedict Arnold concludes that he needs to fight for his country, and he emerges as a leader of men. And starting with his announcement in April 24, just days after news of Lexington and Concord reaches him, that he is going to take charge. And you see the quote here, that the citizens of New Haven were driven to the last necessity and obliged to have recourse to arms in defense of our lives and liberties, and that none but Almighty God shall prevent my marching. This was his first foray as a military leader, right out of the box, right after Lexington and Concord. His first gig, if you will, was to he knew that during the French and Indian War, Fort Ticonderoga in New York had lots and lots of cannons, and he decided that this would be a good thing for his Connecticut militia to go get. And so he leads his men to Fort Ticonderoga, where he meets up with none other than Ethan Allen of Green Mountain Boys fame, already there and already declaring himself in charge of Fort Ticonderoga. Well, that didn't sit well with Benedict Arnold. The two of them clashed. They ended up sharing leadership and not so much sharing credit, because Ethan Allen was very quick to take credit for everything. Arnold in a huff resigned his commission, left the army, went back home in a huff, and for all intents and purposes had disconnected from the military effort of the revolution. Of course, his reputation was damaged. Rumors were circulating about him that he was really kind of a bad apple. In no small part because this is what Ethan Allen was feeding people, that story in order to make himself look good. That all having been said, the people of New York and the soldiers who followed him from his Connecticut militia loved him. They thought he was an incredible leader, and they supported him strongly in all of this. So, what about the expedition? Let's dive into that subject. So, why were they wanting to go on an expedition to Quebec? And actually, why would they want to go to Montreal for that matter? Well, it was at the time that the war broke out, it had the largest concentration of British troops at the start of the war. They had their own governor there, Guy Carleton, who was in Quebec, and it was a very, very strategic place. The St. Lawrence River, which runs right through Quebec and Montreal, was a main artery for delivery of supplies and men and provisions and so forth. And all of that would trickle down from Canada into New York through the Hudson River on down. And for the British, it was a key fort that basically protected those trade routes that they were intending to use and were already now using in connection with their warfare with the colonies. George Washington had concluded this was, as I mentioned, a place that should be focused upon, and efforts made to seize Quebec, take it over, essentially. This was going to, among other things, create a diversion, because over in New York, General Schuyler had his men, his New York troops, poised to go north as well and attack Montreal, which they proceeded to do. But with Washington's expedition to Quebec, it would draw British troops away from the defense of Montreal, increasing the likelihood that the Americans could seize Montreal. It would also cut off those vital supply lines I talked about if we could control Quebec, not the British, and essentially put a stop to that movement of men and material down the St. Lawrence River and thence to New England and New York. And it would disrupt alliances between the British soldiers and Native Americans. We had seen this kind of alliance in the French and Indian War, where the French had mobilized the tribes in Canada, and the British did as well in that war. So there was experience that the Native Americans could very well side with the British, and if we were controlling Quebec, that would at least mitigate that risk. The last thing here was the Continental Congress. They thought that the people of Canada would love to join us in opposing Great Britain, and that they would love to become essentially the 14th colony. And some members of the Continental Congress actually used that phraseology, Canada, the 14th colony. So all of those factors were at work in supporting the idea of launching a mission to Canada. Washington was so confident of what I just said that he drafted in mid-September of 1775 an address to the inhabitants of Canada, where he basically was saying, we know you love us, we know you support us, we're asking for your help when our troops arrive. We want you to help support them with supplies as much as your country affords, he said. I invite you, therefore, as friends and brethren, to provide Colonel Arnold with such supplies as your country affords. That message was actually given to Benedict Arnold to carry with him as the expedition was launched. And let me get into that now. Benedict Arnold did not know General Washington or vice versa until Arnold shows up in Cambridge, where Washington is headquartered, in August of 1775, basically introduces himself and says, I'm your man. I'm your man to go to Canada. And before you know it, Washington has appointed him, given him the rank of colonel, which he didn't have before he quit after Ticonderoga. So now all of a sudden, overnight, Arnold is a colonel. And his immediate tasks, you see here, first of all, recruit 1,000 troops. He needed a very large contingent to march up to Quebec and expect to win a battle against the British troops that were amassed there. He ultimately raised 1,150 men, along with a bunch of volunteers, camp followers, some women included there, Indian guides. They took a bunch of dogs. A number of the officers like to have their dogs with them. So it was a pretty sizable group that was going to march up there. He had to arm and provision them all. He, having accumulated some wealth, he used his own money sometimes to purchase guns, ammunition, and so forth, food, clothing. And he was quite magnanimous in that regard. He also arranged for the transport ships. He needed to carry the men from Cambridge up to Maine, to the Kennebec River. That's where they were going to essentially launch the mission. And the mission involved carrying just a ton of supplies up the Kennebec River on boats. So another big logistical challenge was to build 200 boats that they could then pull, in some cases, pull up the river. It was a very treacherous river to go upstream in, but they were able to do that in 3 weeks' time, incredibly. And they arrived to find 200 boats waiting for them. All of this, in theory, they were supposed to maintain secrecy, but this was all an open secret. First of all, Arnold didn't stop his troops from parading in Cambridge before they left. And then when they got to Newburyport, which is a stepping off point to get to Kennebec, they were parading some more. So everybody and his brother knew that something was happening, the British included, because they were watching. They had American deserters who tipped them off. General Gage, who was down in Boston, was fully aware that this expedition was about to launch. He thought, however, they were going to go to Halifax up in Nova Scotia. He guessed wrong. And in the meantime, his Vice Admiral Graves basically said, I can't be bothered doing anything about that. I'm stretched thin. He ended up being just terribly blamed for missing this opportunity to bottle up the 1,000 soldiers and keep them from launching themselves up to Maine. He didn't do it, and he was ultimately dismissed from the Navy because of that. So the expedition is launched. The general order issues in early September. Troops get on fishing boats to go north. They had 100 men on each ship. The troops arrived at the Kennebec River, Fort Western, September 23, and that's where their boats were waiting for them. Finally, September 26, the march begins. It's pretty late, by the way, in terms of New England weather, for anybody to be launching anything at the end of September, because once you get into October, November, the weather gets really challenging. And in this case, in the fall of 1775, as you'll hear, absolutely horrific conditions ultimately befell them. Here's the map of what was going on. You can see Arnold's route on the left-hand side. You can see over here it says Montgomery's route. Who was that? Well, General Schuyler was in ultimate command of these troops, but his second in command was Richard Montgomery. He was a general too. He'd fought in the French and Indian War, quite a warrior in his own right. But they were simultaneously and in a coordinated way moving north along Lake Champlain over here, you see, and they were going to attack first Fort St. John's, and then their real target was Montreal. If they were able to seize Montreal, then the plan was to then meet up with the Arnold troops in Quebec as they hopefully successfully traverse the Kennebec River, the northernmost parts of Maine, and emerged successful in the trek to Quebec. It was going to be essentially a pincer movement from two different sides. This is another map that kind of shows down here you see a big A, well, that's Cambridge, and then B, that's Newburyport. Here's the Kennebec River going up, 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 up through Maine. Here's Fort Western is right here. Fort Halifax, kind of the last civilization, if you will, before they launched this last segment up the river, crossing these mountains, and then on into Canada up here. G is a lake, which was their target because the rest of the trip from there, supposedly, according to sources, was going to be kind of a cakewalk. So that was the march. Who was on this trip, by the way, besides Benedict Arnold? Well, there was a cast of characters, some of whom became quite famous in their own rights later on in the Revolution. Most notably, you see Captain Daniel Morgan here. He gained tremendous fame as a leader of men, particularly riflemen. And in this case, he had come from Virginia with a large contingent of riflemen. When the Lexington alarm went off and the Virginians heard about it, they immediately dropped everything, marched to Boston, by which time Lexington conquered was all over, but the expedition was about to launch. So Daniel Morgan joins it along with his men, and he played an incredible leadership role, both in the expedition and in the ultimate battle. General Nathaniel Greene is of great fame. His cousin Christopher was a lieutenant colonel who took part in this. He ultimately after the battle was taken prisoner, and most unfortunately, after being released from captivity and going back into the army for a number of years. In 1781, he's brutally killed and butchered by loyalist troops in New York. That's how his life ended, quite sadly, but he acquitted himself incredibly well in connection with the Arnold Expedition. Henry Dearborn had a very illustrious career after the expedition and after serving his country all the way through the Revolution. He went on to become U.S. Secretary of War. Lastly, Aaron Burr, you know that name. He wasn't in the military, but he was a volunteer who joined the Arnold Expedition. He was a 19-year-old kid, basically. He was shockingly a real warrior. He led troops in the battle itself. He really stood out as a leader of men, and he was promoted to lieutenant colonel. He, again, started as a volunteer. After this battle, he became a lieutenant colonel. And, of course, future vice president under Thomas Jefferson, and the person who ended up having a duel with Alexander Hamilton and killed him. They looked like this. There was no Continental Army uniform at that point. The war had just started, and Continental Army had just been formed in June. So they looked like this. They were, in buckskins, and many of them had come off of their farms. They had their own rifles and so forth. They would distinguish themselves by having different color cockades in their hats for officers on the one hand, common people on the other hand. And it was basically, I say a 2 month, it was really ended up being 3 months march if you timed it from when they left Cambridge. 3 months, 400 miles overland through the forests, over rivers, over mountains, through horrific weather conditions, hunger and sickness threatening them constantly, many people dying along the way. I said he had raised 1,100 people. By the time they got to Quebec, they were down to about 600 people, and not all of them were ready for duty. There were still many, many people who were sick and hurting at the end of this trek. Lots of river crossings, carrying the boats, 400-pound boats, carrying all the provisions along the way in torrential downpours, snowstorms, etc. The men were constantly wet, tired, hungry, all of that. Part of this was due to the fact that they didn't really know where they were going half of the time. This was not an established trail that white settlers had mastered. This was an old Indian trail, and they knew of it because back during the French and Indian War, a British lieutenant, John Montresor, had mapped it when he came down from Canada to Massachusetts, and after the fact made a map, so to speak. You'll see it in a second. Not very accurate, but it was the only thing they really had. It was misleading in some cases, incomplete in others, but that was the main tool they had for figuring out where they were going to go. Here's his map that he did, and you can see just right off the bat, not a lot of detail if you were down on the ground level of all this, very high level map. Again, here's my cursor showing you down here, way down here. Here's the beginning of the Kennebec River. It comes up this way, and then they divert over here. They're going up through this very brutal stretch of rapids and bogs and so forth to hit the mountains and traverse the mountains, get up to that lake I was talking about. You see it here, and then on to Quebec up that way. But that's the map that they basically relied upon, sometimes at their peril. I have to advertise this journal. I happen to have an ancestor who was in the Arnold Expedition. His name was William Humphrey. He kept a day-to-day journal, and it's sitting in the basement of the Rhode Island Historical Society now, there were a number of soldiers who were, first of all, quite literate and also kept daily journals of the expedition and covering the time period that after they had lost the battle, they were imprisoned for about 8 months. And in the case of my ancestor, William Humphrey, he recorded his time in prison as well. As an incredibly rich resource if you're interested in sort of the day-to-day blow by blow. On the right there is his certificate of membership in the Society of Cincinnati. He not only survived the battle, he survived imprisonment. He went back into service to his country. He was at Valley Forge with General Washington, went through all of the battles up to Yorktown, and became a founding member of the Society of Cincinnati. So I'm quite proud of that. He had some interesting and kind of scary entries along the way in his journal. You can see October 24, we are absolutely in a dangerous situation. The men are very much disheartened and desirous to return. They didn't. They kept going. These men were just incredibly courageous. They barely had anything to eat. You can see here they had 5 pints of flour, 2 ounces of meat. That was basically as much as they had to sustain themselves. They weren't just sitting around, they were also exerting themselves massively every day, 24/7 pretty much, including, sleepless nights, being snowed upon with no tents and no cover and no protection. Just a terribly challenging expedition. They had lots of setbacks and delays, miscalculations. You can see some of them here. They thought when they started all this that the route was 180 miles. Turned out to be almost twice that, 350 miles. They had heard that you could do it in 20 days. Well, it took them 45 days. They were carrying 100 tons of provisions. Big mistake. They couldn't really handle that much. They thought they could, but they really couldn't. It was just much too much. They lost a lot of these boats along the way. They crashed on the rocks. They were taken downstream. They capsized. All of those things really made them impractical as a practical matter. Lots of delays ended up really exposing the troops, because by the time they were at the Canadian border, it was the dead of winter. There was storms, there was flooding, there were freezing temperatures. They had not bargained for that. Had they been more timely in getting started, had they been more timely in covering ground, they might have gotten there much earlier. And of course, they lost the element of surprise in the process. Basically, the British troops were ready and waiting for them by the time they were done. I mentioned here that starvation was a major issue. The journals tell us that the men had gotten down to the point of eating soap, shoe leather, cartridge boxes. And unfortunately, they ended up having to slaughter their dogs and eat the dogs. It was just that bad. And then lastly, one of the officers in charge of one of the divisions basically turned around and went back, taking 300 men with him. It was just a devastating loss. Not anything that Benedict Arnold even knew was happening until it was too late. He was gone. In the midst of all this, Arnold and George Washington are actually corresponding. Don't ask me how they were able to get letters back and forth, but they did, and they're still preserved today. You can go online at Founders Online and read these letters, some of which I've excerpted here. But a lot of what Arnold was reporting back to General Washington was pretty harsh stuff. You'll see on October 27, our march has been attended with an amazing deal of fatigue. That's an understatement. And I've been much deceived in every account of our route. Deceived in no small part because the map they were using was inaccurate. The trails were not marked. The trails disappeared. In some cases, there was no trail. So he was, again, understating the severity of things. But Washington was getting word that this was not turning out as he thought it would. There were among other things, their ammunition was getting wet on a daily basis. Our cartridges are unfit to use. So, what was going to happen when they got to Quebec and their ammunition was all ruined from wet, from snow, from rain? They were left with no more than 5 rounds to each man. You can't win a battle with only 5 bullets, basically. But that's what he was reporting on November 20 as they were getting closer and closer to Quebec. George Washington on December the 5th writes back to Arnold, and among other things he notes is that officer, Lieutenant Colonel Enos, shows up in Cambridge, and he says to Arnold, "You are not more surprised than I am." And Washington put him under arrest, had him tried for quitting the detachment without your orders, he says. Ironically, he was tried and acquitted because there were no witnesses who could testify against him. They were all still up in Canada at that point, and the only people who did testify supported him because they were part of the group of quitters who came back with him. So they supported the decision of Lieutenant Colonel Enos to basically desert, and that's the only word you can use to describe it. Okay, so the battle. Let's talk about the battle a little bit. I'd mentioned General Schuyler's move to Montreal. Well, he got sick, and so General Montgomery took over, and it was Montgomery who led the charge, and successfully so, to capture Montreal. He did that in mid-November. And in the meantime, in that same couple of days, Arnold had gotten to Quebec. The plains of Abraham specifically were a big, broad space outside of Quebec where they planned to make the attack. As I mentioned, he only had 600 men left at that point, many of them still starving and sick, but nevertheless, he had 600 men. Montgomery shows up December the 2nd, so now he's added a couple hundred troops from General Montgomery. On the other hand, the British have more men. They've got 1,800 men to defend the city. And so boldly, even though he's outnumbered, Arnold has his men fire arrows into the city with notes tied to the arrows, basically demanding surrender. The British give him the back of the hand, and they completely ignore that. So Arnold orders bombardment to start December the 8th. But they've only got like a couple of cannons. They were undersized. They couldn't do anything. They bounced off of the city walls, basically. And so the siege begins, though. They are trying to entrap all the British troops and citizens in the city, in the fort. And that goes on for a number of weeks. Here's the big problem. Arnold knew that the men who had come with him, militiamen, had only enlisted for a short period of time, 6 months. And almost all of them, their enlistments were going to expire on December 31, and he would lose his army. So he knew he had to do something in the next couple of weeks and days to attack, or he would never be able to do that again. He would lose his men. So it came down to attacking on the last possible day, December 31, the last possible day before he loses his army. They're going to attack at night, and they're going to attack at night in an absolutely driving snowstorm with wind, snow, little or no visibility, etc. But that was what they were forced to do. This is a map of the battle plan. Here's General Arnold's troops over here. His headquarters were up here across this river. He had to cross with a ferry to get over here, but Arnold's troops were going to be here, where you see at the top of the north side, General Montgomery down below. And they were going to do, again, a pincer movement coming to this point here. You can't tell the elevations, but this is the lower city, they called it, the lower town, rather. It's at sea level, basically. There's the St. Lawrence here that's shaded. That's the St. Lawrence River. This is the lower town. The upper town is here, As you can see, it says Quebec Upper Town. And there were going to be four points of attack. There was going to be General Arnold's troops coming up here and around the bend. There was going to be another unit attacking St. John Gate. That's the main gate into the upper town. There's another gate over here, St. Louis Gate, which was also going to be attacked. These were feint movements to draw troops away from where the real action was going to be, which was down here at the point. And then there was Montgomery's troops. You can see very faintly here this little tiny square or rectangle. That was a fortified house which stood in the way of Montgomery's troops coming here from the south up to the point of where they were going to meet. And Montgomery thought that this was an empty house. It turned out it wasn't. It was filled with soldiers. It was filled with muskets. It was filled with cannon. And as Montgomery approaches, he's leading the charge. You can see it's the 1st New York Regiment he's leading. He's in the vanguard. He's not just in the vanguard, he is on point, him personally. And they approach this fortified house. He gets close enough, thinking it's empty, and to his great misfortune, the men open fire. He is instantly killed. They shoot him in the head. His head is basically dismembered. And so the commander of half of the assault troops is dead. And his subordinate commander who takes over, a coward, decides that he's had enough, his troops have had enough, and they stop. They do not proceed on to the meeting point, which ended up being a fatal problem for Arnold's troops coming around the corner. Arnold had Captain Morgan in charge of the vanguard, so it was Morgan and his riflemen who were coming down on the north side and encountering barricades. You can see a first barricade, a second barricade. Long story short, he and his men end up being trapped here, in part because the British, no fools, had their own troops following behind and basically squeezing them, shooting from behind. These ramparts here, you see these dark lines. British soldiers were up there shooting down on them. It was kind of a killing field, if you will. And so ultimately, the Americans have to surrender. It's just there's no way out for them. Arnold himself, as they were coming around this horn, he's shot in the leg and so badly injured that he is carried off the field back to a hospital that's here back across the river. So they are forced to all surrender. You can see down here this text box. Everything started at 2 a.m. The actual assault really didn't commence until 4. The surrender didn't happen until 9 o'clock. So it was a good 7 hours of just pitched warfare going on before the ultimate surrender at 9 a.m. 400 Americans are killed, wounded or captured. As I mentioned, Montgomery's killed. Colonel Arnold is wounded. All of the officers who didn't get killed were imprisoned, along with many of the men. They're segregated there at the fort. So all the officers are together. They get a little bit better treatment, but not great. My ancestor, William Humphrey's journal, says it all. I've been unfortunate enough to become a prisoner. And as to all the men who died, he says they have died in a glorious cause. But all of the prisoners, you can see here at the last bullet, the officers are crammed into a room 30 feet by 30 for 36 officers, all crammed in there together. So the conditions were just horrific. This is a famous painting. John Trumbull was a famous painter of founding fathers. He did an exquisite painting of George Washington later on, but he chose to do a painting of the death of General Montgomery. It was a major setback for the Americans, and in death, General Montgomery became a hero, so much so that they, have monuments to him. There is a very big monument in New York City to General Montgomery at Trinity Church, which is where he is buried. The aftermath, even though Arnold is injured, hospitalized, he refuses to admit defeat. He stays, and he has his troops who haven't been captured stay with him. He doesn't have many left. And those who stay immediately are exposed to a smallpox outbreak, and many of them die from smallpox. There's no inoculation to save them, and so many. I think the number was at least 100 soldiers die from smallpox infections. Arnold is taken out, sent back to Montreal. When the British show up with a lot more reinforcements, it's just an impossible situation. So Arnold packs it in, goes back to Montreal, and then ultimately to Fort Ticonderoga and Crown Point, where he can be of better use. August, basically a prisoner exchange is entered into, and all the prisoners, including my ancestors, are able to return to the Continental Army or the militias, as the case may be. I'm going to end on this note. So, if not for what happened later in 1780 when he became a traitor, Benedict Arnold wouldn't have been remembered as a hero. And to this day, there are plaques in his honor, both in the Kennebec River in Maine, you see that on the left, and in Quebec, ironically. The Quebecans put up a monument, or rather a plaque, which memorializes and commemorates the December 31 attack, mentioning Benedict Arnold by name. So I would say that the story of the Siege of Quebec is not just about Benedict Arnold as a great leader of men, but it's about these 600 soldiers from all walks of life who volunteered for duty, volunteered for what turned out to be just an absolutely heroic effort, both to get to Quebec, to launch a New Year's Eve attack on the city of Quebec. And although the battle was not successful for the Americans, many heroes came out of that. And I, for one, want to honor their memory with this talk. This month, December of 2025, the 250th anniversary of one of the greatest events, one of the greatest sagas in American history. So with that, I'm going to call this to an end. I hope you enjoyed it. Please go to our website, American Heritage Partners, if you have comments about the talk and you want to share information. Happy to hear from you and happy to go offline and talk to you. Everybody have a Merry Christmas. Keep the men of the Arnold Expedition in your thoughts as you enjoy your warm fires and your Christmas feasts. Remember how we got here, our American freedoms. There are many men who paid a price for that. Take care, everybody.